Oh, I'm sorry. I thought.
No. Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, joined today by my good friend, my old friend, Davis Mattek. And I want to just start because I tweeted this out earlier and I need to tweet out that we're live right now. We've talked for more than a decade now about this sport. How does it feel that someone can now unironically call you old friend Davis Mattek?
Honestly, it feels great. My 32nd birthday was yesterday.
Washed.
You know, a time for reflection. I am now of the age that if an NFL wide receiver is my age, I'd be like, I don't know, man. I don't know about a guy like me and Devontae Adams are the same age. And Heath, when I get up in the morning, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I don't want to draft Devontae Adams as much when I know how I feel when I get up in the morning.
It's 100% true. And we know that like you get to that age and things that get hurt sometimes just keep hurting. I mean, like much longer than they should. And that's the things that, NFL players actually have real reasons to be hurt. Before we jump into what we're doing on today's show, I do want you to tell everyone what you've been working on, where they can find your work.
I have two places you can really engage with my work. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's just, if you search my name on YouTube, it is going to pop right up. Or you can find all of my rankings, best ball, dynasty, redraft tiers. If you want my work for fantasy football, you can find that on patreon.com/Davis Mattek. All of that stuff is there.
Absolutely wonderful. On today's show, we are going to talk about our favorite dynasty buys before week one. It is almost point scoring season. Like we're going to have to start caring about whether or not these guys are going to score any fantasy points, or at least half the teams in the league are. So we'll talk about some guys we think are going to score some points, maybe some guys that you should buy even if you're a rebuilder. We always start with 3 questions for our guest, but Davis has been on this show a lot of times. We don't have to ask him the normal 3 questions. So I've got some different 3 questions. And I want to start with one of your favorite buys that you sent me was Xavier Worthy. 3 catches for 62 yards. Chiefs really wanted to get him involved in that second week of the preseason. No one pressed him and knocked him onto the ground. It was fantastic. One of mine is Rashee Rice, who apparently is just going to play all of the snaps with Patrick Mahomes and see 30% of the targets. Mahomes keeps talking him up. Seems like there's no suspension coming, as best we know right now. How do you view this receiving core in 2024 and beyond?
So I think specifically for Dynasty, the reason why I think we're both right about Rice and about Worthy is that Hollywood is either going to play well enough this season to earn himself a large contract from another organization that has more cap space, or he is going to be so bad that he doesn't factor in to Worthy and Rice's production. I don't really see much of a middle ground. I mean, I suppose, 63 receptions, 814 yards, and 5 touchdowns could happen. But if he does that, he still probably gets a bigger contract, like kind of what happened to Juju. So then you're talking about the reason why I specifically have Worthy as the buy is that Rashee is going to be suspended next season, in my estimation. And Worthy would have to play very bad this season to not have his dynasty value rise. Like he would almost have to go full Jalen Reagor. I think if he even does what McCole Hardman did as a rookie, and it's been a long time, so we forgot what that season was, 555 yards and 6 touchdowns. If Worthy does that, I don't think his value diminishes at all. Really, I don't. It's a pretty low bar playing with Pat. And I mean, obviously, I think he's a much better player than Hardman was even as a prospect.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to try to use for the buys portion of this show is what their cost is in terms of Dynasty League football August ADP. There's lots of different ways that you can measure cost in Dynasty. That's the one I've chosen this time. It's not necessarily the best, but looking at Xavier Worthy, he is wide receiver 27 in ADP this month. That's pretty close to where I have him ranked, maybe a spot or 2 below.
So I've got him above some of the older guys.
Right.
Like I've got him ahead of Debo, who obviously I love Debo. And this is the thing with Dynasty is that it's so contextual. If I've got this great team, I totally want to have Debo, but all things being equal, I think Worthy is a more valuable asset than Debo for Dynasty.
Now, Rice is actually, and this is one that probably is changing as we speak. I don't think that any ADP you're looking at can keep up with his meteoric redraft rise. And I'd guess that's going to be reflected in dynasty ranks and ADP relatively soon. But he was actually wide receiver 32 in terms of August startup ADP. I've got him a couple of spots ahead of Worthy. Is it just as simple as if you're a contender, you'd rather roster Rice, and if you're not, you'd rather roster Worthy, or do you prefer Worthy in all cases or Rice in all cases?
The interesting thing is I think we're going to have a much clearer answer about which one of them that we prefer in like probably a month. Like
Right.
probably by like week 3, we'll be like, oh, yeah, Rashee Rice is actually just this great player and it wasn't manufactured stuff last year. Like Rashee Rice actually is just a good stylistic fit and maybe Worthy is going to take more time. I actually tend to believe that Worthy, if I just kind of have faith in Andy, I kind of think Worthy's special. I kind of think that Andy and Veach were like, this guy can be our Deshaun Jackson. This guy can get 130 targets a year and kind of replace what we lost with Tyreek, which is not to say that Rashee Rice can't compete, like can't be an additive part of the offense. Particularly, I think Rice's big value to the team is when Kelsey retires.
Right.
They will need a guy to just catch 85 passes with an ADOT of 6.3 and keep the chains moving. And I totally think he can do that. But Worthy, I think, has the ability to be like a league winner year after year. Where like he's the wide receiver 9 in Dynasty, I think is a potential thing for him.
That might have actually been 3 questions about the Chiefs wide receivers, but we still have 2 questions left. So, it's my show. We'll do what I want. Are we, like, speaking of Worthy, are we wheels up on all of the round 1 rookie draft picks from 3 months ago? Has anybody lost steam from the guys that we were drafting in the top 12, or is it just like full steam ahead on all these guys?
That's a great question. Maybe slight wheels down on Ladd, like maybe just a smidgen down on Ladd because he's already been banged up. The training camp reports have been good, but not like, oh, we can't wait to build the entire passing offense out of this guy. There's like a lot of Brendan Rice and Simi Fehoko involved. But that would be it. I mean, I had Ladd lower than his consensus rankings anyway, right, because I was taking Bo Nix and JJ McCarthy over him in these super flex drafts. But other than that, yeah, I think that's probably the case.
And I guess in Superflex, like through no fault of his own, JJ McCarthy lost a little bit of value just because he's not going to play football this year. But other than that, yeah, it does seem like everybody else pretty much having a good summer. I want to ask now on the other side of the spectrum. Let's say you're a contender, a top 3 or 4 roster. You're eventually going to be buying some vets this season. Are you shopping now, or are you waiting until closer to the deadline?
No, I'm super shopping now. I think this is like this next like 2 weeks that we're in. This is like the most ideal time to do it. There are a lot of like, if you have a contending team, like you need to be trading for like James Conner and Austin Eckler and DeAndre Hopkins and Evan Ingram. Like these are it's boring, but these are the guys who. It's particularly, I don't know what your diet is like of these leagues. I play in a lot of best ball leagues for Dynasty, where it's 30-man rosters. And like the number one thing you can do to win is literally have 1 through 30 guys who are scoring points. Like no Jelani Woods, no Tank Bigsby roster spots, like all guys who are going to be active and part of their offenses on game day.
I think that's a great point. And I would say like a lot of the guys you named fall into this category. My distinction is I'm buying aggressively with 2nd, 3rd, 4th round picks. I'd like to hold on to I like to have that round 1 pick in the holster, like just in case I need it in October or November. Like I've had a hole open up on my roster. I want to make sure I use that to go get a guy who's healthy. So I'd like to hold on to the round 1 pick, but yeah, I think a lot of those older veterans you mentioned, you're probably getting for a 2nd or 2 seconds or a 2nd and a 3rd. And that's exactly the types of deals that I'm trying to make because the risk just isn't that great. We're going to take our first break and then we're going to get into some of our high-end Dynasty buys. Davis has no budget. He is buying the expensive players in Dynasty right now. I think it's before we get started on this, I need to throw a little bit of love to Andrew because we can all relate. I bought Sky Moore and traded way too much for the human joystick. I have faith in Worthy's profile. I believe he's a total wide receiver. Like, I do not care. I drafted Clyde Edwards-Helaire too early. We're just gonna keep smashing that same button over and over. Speaking of smashing that button, I would say highest priced buy, Devon Achane, a guy that there's been many battles fought over him in the Twitter streets this past offseason. Currently RB9 by Dynasty League Football, August ADP, which is really close to where I have him, a lower end RB1. Not worried at all about him playing in the second preseason game. Like he's gonna break out this year, right?
I'm not. I think this will be the last chance to acquire Devon Achane, period. Because we've all played Dynasty for a long time. Players get to a certain stage of production where they are actually just not acquirable. So let's say you put Josh Allen in a super flex league into a trade calculator. Put him in your little trade calculator. Send that offer to your league mate. It's getting smash denied. People just don't. That's kind of the thing about Dynasty is people don't really trade 25-year-old Christian McCaffrey. People try and get Justin Jefferson right now. No one's selling. Try and get CeeDee Lamb right now. No one's selling. This will be the time to get Achane at a cost that is. I bet you could get Achane right now for your 2025 first and I don't know, Braylon Allen or Ray Davis or just kind of someone like that, like a like for like, or a Jalen Tolbert, just kind of like a throw in a guy who's not a zero, whatever. But basically a 2025 first, I think will get him to some level of frequency in your leagues.
You mentioned some great names there, and I think that's probably right. I'll throw one at you. We were just talking about if you are a contender, but let's say first couple of the weeks, things go terrible for a team you thought was a contender. You got a couple major injuries. You're starting 0-3. The only guy you really still have healthy is Christian McCaffrey. It's time to jump off that train. What do you need in addition to McCaffrey to trade for Achane?
I'm selling McCaffrey and I'm getting Achane, a first and JJ McCarthy or something like that. Like I would say right now, I should have put this on our list. If you have a crappy team, if you've got literally you're trying to get the number 1 overall pick, JJ McCarthy should be you should be messaging the guy who's got JJ McCarthy every day, trying to get him. That should be your number 1 buy, actually.
So one of the things I talked to Jacob Gibbs about last week or the year before was this idea that upside is the only thing that matters. And he was saying that he really thought that was more of a redraft concept than a dynasty concept.
No, I think it super matters in Dynasty.
I was going to say, he is the ultimate upside is the only thing that matters, because you look at his efficiency last year and historically players who, first off, nobody is as efficient as he was, but players who are wildly efficient at the running back position on a low number of touches, get more touches the next year, score a lot of fantasy points, something like 5 out of the 7 that have been anywhere close to what he did, had monster years the next year. But he does come with, all running backs come with risk. And I think you'd probably agree he comes with a little bit more risk than the average running back. There's some size concerns, there's some usage concerns, there's some injury concerns. Is this strictly a upside is all that matters play, or do you think maybe his lower floor is a little bit overblown?
I think the floor case is super overblown, because what world are you living in where he doesn't get the ball and he's active? There's not a world where that happens.
Week 1 there are 28 running back touches for the Dolphins.
He gets 13 of them.
Mostert gets 15, he gets 13?
Yeah.
Okay.
That is about in line with my expectation, and my expectation is also that efficiency is rewarded, and that Mostert just had the most. His Mostert season was actually much more of an efficiency outlier than Achane's, which is so funny because no one would think about it that way. But if you look at fantasy points over expectation versus what Mostert has done in his career. Versus, like, he also, I mean, the thing is also the McDaniel offense is the same as the Shanahan offense in the sense that guys are gonna almost always produce fantasy points over expectation because of the situation.
So I'm going to give a running back buy as well. Not as expensive as HN, and probably someone like I've said this multiple times this year, maybe even late last year, but nobody's really moved him or bought him. So I'm just going to say it again now that Javonte Williams going to be a little more expensive because it seems pretty clear he's not getting cut, as some of the beat tweets said over the summer. He is the lead running back. And I think like Jaleel McLaughlin as the number 2, I like him a lot, and I like him in that role. I think there's less threat that he's turning into a lead running back than there is with HN for sure. Like he is not a guy who's going to have 15 to 20 touches on a regular basis. So Javonte Williams seems pretty locked in to that RB1 role in a Sean Payton offense that is pretty RB centric. We're now 2 years removed from the ACL. He's RB27 still as what, a 24-year-old number 1 running back. I am absolutely buying him everywhere I can.
I love it. It's a multi-layered bet. It's a bet that Javonte stays healthy. It's a bet that he looks much more like the guy he did as a rookie at the University of North Carolina than what he did last season. It's also a bet on Bo Nix and Sean Payton. The early returns in the preseason have been very good. Essentially looks like Bo Nix is going to be what Payton wants him to be, which is just execute the offense. I need you to be the point guard. I don't need you to be the straw that stirs the drink. I just want you to distribute the ball where I want it. I think he probably is going to do it. I mean, can Bo Nix be CJ Stroud and elevate a whole team? Absolutely not. Can he be way better than the average returns for a rookie quarterback? I think. I mean, he's also 24 years old, so you would hope so.
I think he can be better at doing what Sean Payton wants him to do than Russell Wilson can. I just had this thought. Can you imagine how much Sean Payton has hated watching Caleb Williams play football this preseason?
Oh, it's the exact opposite of what Sean Payton. If you gave Sean Payton some truth serum, he would tell you, I don't even want to coach Caleb Williams. I don't even find that interesting. That's not what I want. It's Rick Carlisle. It's the Rick Carlisle thing. Rick Carlisle didn't really like coaching Luka Doncic because Luka wants to do his own thing. He wants to run the offense his way. He wants to get in his own sets. He doesn't want his coach to be Rick Carlisle literally will call plays out as his point guard is bringing the ball up the floor. That's what Sean Payton would be as a basketball coach. That's what Bo Nix did at Oregon. I mean, that is what Bo Nix. Right. You think Bo Nix was the straw that stirred the drink for that Oregon team? Absolutely not.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, I've coached a lot of youth basketball, and I often joke with the parents about how, like, I wish I just had an Xbox controller so I could just make everybody do the things that I've told them to do. And that's 100% Sean Payton, except he's doing it with adults that are making millions of dollars in the NFL. Let's get to your second dynasty buy, and like, I just want to cheer through this entire thing. You do your thing on Trey McBride, the current tight end 2 by Dynasty League, August ADP.
So you could not only could this be Trey McBride, but you could also make this Mark Andrews. You could also make this Kyle Pitts. You could also make this Kincaid. You could make it Kittle. Really, honestly, probably anyone but Kelsey. And Kelsey, I mean, if you're a contending team, probably not anyone's going to add more points to your roster than Kelsey. I think the advantage in Dynasty of having an elite tight end is I mean, it's maybe even a bigger advantage than having like McCaffrey or Jefferson or something, because you are like going to be just smashing the Dalton Schultz teams. Like you're going to be projected like to beat them by 4 points on any given week. I loved McBride as a prospect. Any tight end that can lead their team in receptions is always such a flag to me. To me, it's kind of like, now obviously there's been examples where this has gone wrong, like the Jason Morrow example, but it's very simplistic. But Trey McBride had 90 receptions his final season in college. The second player on his team had 43. And basically the second that he got a full-time role last season, I mean, he was above league average in yards per route run and targets per route run, playing with Josh Dobbs and Clayton Tune and then Kyler coming back from the thing. And then the second layer on this is I'm crazy high on the Cardinals. I think the Cardinals are like a dark horse team to lead the NFL in scoring, period. And, Dortch and Wilson are really good secondary contributors. James Conner and Trey Benson are good receiving backs. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is just going to kind of like open up the whole experience for everyone. And I'm a big Kyler believer as well. And again, McBride, I mean, basically my line is, can I get a player for a 2025 first without adding anything else in? And I think for McBride in a lot of formats, that will be the case. It could be wrong. Maybe there's a real McBride believer, but I think that gets accepted in a lot of leagues.
There is a real McBride believer. It's me. And he's my tight end 1 for this year. I think the efficiency gains from Kyler being 100% and Marvin Harrison doing what he does will more than make up for any volume losses that he has. I mean, he was on pace for 144 targets as a starter last year. Maybe he doesn't do that, but I do think he'll be better on a per game basis. My tight end buy is actually a guy, and I wonder if you can buy into this at all, that I actually think could kind of bridge that gap between the elites to the Dalton Schultzes and Dallas Goederts and Pat Fryermuths of the world. And that is Jake Ferguson. I've seen everybody seems to accept what happened with CeeDee Lamb in the last 10 games of last year is the new reality in Dallas. And I think rightly so. CeeDee Lamb had a breakout and they don't really have any other pass catchers. But the last 12 games, including the playoffs for Jake Ferguson, was almost as big of a leap. He was at 13.8 PPR fantasy points per game. And really, it was, you don't even have, I know I say including the playoffs and everyone thinks, yeah, you're sneaking that 3 touchdown playoff game in there. He was basically doing the same thing without the touchdowns the last 10 games of the season. This offense just went hyper concentrated on CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson and then added nobody else of consequence. So I do think that there's a chance that Jake Ferguson's a 13 fantasy point per game guy this year that's just being overlooked as part of that. I don't even know if you'd call it mid tier that's tied in 10 through 15.
So I think conceptually I'm fine with it. It would be a price thing for me. And it would be like, if I'm parting with this asset,
right?
If I'm parting with let's say a good second, or I'm parting with the wide receiver 37 to acquire, I probably would rather either spend less to add someone like Hunter Henry, who I'm a big believer in Drake May, so I really like adding Hunter Henry, or I would rather up it and say, I'll give you Jermaine Burton, my 2025 second, and Blake Corum to get George Kittle, I think is where I'm at. But the reason why I think that is kind of a bad bias of Ferguson was not a particularly good prospect.
Right.
It's also like literally Dalton Schultz bias of well, I didn't think Schultz was any good. And then Ferguson just replicated Dalton Schultz's stats. So maybe it's just Dak. And all of that is not particularly high level fantasy football analysis. So I really might just be wrong.
Right. Well, and again, Ferguson is a guy that's probably, you said it, it's probably going to cost you a second round pick. I don't think anybody is demanding anything more than that. You might be able, it might even be a player that you value as a low end second that you're able to send for Ferguson because the person you're trading with likes them more than you do. And it also might be a deal if you're making a high level deal where he can almost be a throw into the deal. He's not as expensive as a Trey McBride, but not far from as expensive as your number 3 buy. It's TJ Hawkinson, who we still don't really know if he's going to start the year out or how many weeks he's going to miss. I think the expectation from most people is we're not going to see him for the first month of the season. Is this a contender buy? Is this a rebuilder buy? Is this an anybody buy? TJ Hawkinson tight end 10 by current ADP.
I think it's probably an anyone buy. I really think it probably just goes for if you're a rebuilding team. I mean, you want to talk about buy low, sell high. Hawkinson gets announced on the PUP list. You send a trade offer for Hawkinson. Hawkinson comes off the PUP list week 7, runs 54% of the routes, scores a touchdown on 4 targets. You immediately flip him for a late first to the team that had whoever. Let's say a contending team has Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts has rug pulled us for the 9th consecutive season. And you flip him. I mean, I think it's a total situation. And then it's a contending team. Again, same thing. If I could get TJ Hawkinson for my 2025 second as a contending team right now, and maybe I'm starting Jake Ferguson. I actually, this is very on brand. I've got a Jake Ferguson team in an industry league with that Scott Barrett put together, and Ferguson is my tight end one. I might ship out my 2025 second for TJ Hawkinson in this format because I think Hawkinson is going to score more fantasy points per game once he comes back from this injury.
I would take Hawkinson in 2025 for sure. I think we've probably seen that we overestimate how quickly, and it's different by every player, but there's a chance that he comes back week 7 and he's just not really himself for a month too.
Well, Hawkinson, he's had another injury. He had another lower body injury at some point. I'll have to go. Let me see.
I think the nice thing is that, like, he's not a guy who the last couple of years has been producing fantasy points because he's doing a whole lot of things running with the football anyway. Like, it's just been a big target volume. And it may just come down to how bad is Sam Darnold and how ready is Jordan Addison when that happens. And like, what does the target distribution look like? I do think I would, and it's funny because Hawkinson's 3 years older than Ferguson. He's 27 at the start of the year, Ferguson 25. So just 2. For a rebuilder, I'd prefer Hawkinson because I think the long-term upside is bigger.
Here's a correlated buy. If I could get Sam Darnold for a 3rd round pick in any superflex format, it doesn't matter, contending, middle of the road, rebuild. I'm sending out any 3rd for Sam Darnold. So that it is infinite upside. Sam Darnold could turn into Geno Smith. He could also turn into a 0, but it is an insanely good pick.
And related, I've went and picked up Nick Mullins in a couple of deep superflex leagues because, like, Justin Jefferson had 476 yards with him in 4 games. I can't imagine he's going to allow Sam Darnold to be bad for too long before he says, "Hey, start that guy." I think you're right for sure. Darnold for a 3rd and 100% go get that done if you can. I've got one more buy before our second break. It's Tua Tagovailoa. He is currently QB 16. I should add the caveat that the CBS leagues are 6-point per pass touchdown leagues. I know it's probably slightly more 4-point per pass touchdown leagues, especially when you get in industry leagues, even more of that. But I think it's really underrated. You're talking about a guy who led the NFL in passing yards last year.
Yeah.
The year before led the league in yards per attempt and touchdown rate. I think really the only reason we didn't see a better fantasy number from him last year is because the number of blowout victories that the Dolphins had. I think their defense is considerably worse this year. 600 pass attempts, kind of my expectation, which opens the door in my mind for a 5,000 yard, 35 touchdown season. Tua is one of those guys who could go have a top 5 season without the rushing production. He's not going to have the rushing production, and he's not being valued like that at all. I've basically got him, Jordan Love, Trevor Lawrence, and Purdy all in the same tier. Tua by far the cheapest of that group.
I don't love it because I think the thing we've forgotten about him is the concussion stuff, where, I mean, we kind of thought maybe for a little bit he was going to retire. I think if I was buying a mid-range superflex quarterback right now, I guess it depends on what your league mates are using for rankings. And because in rankings, Justin Herbert and Tua are kind of close. I think my guess would be that's a rankings thing and not a reality thing, where if you started to get into the trade market, the Herbert guy does not want to move him. The Tua guy might want to move him. What about Tua versus Goff? Where would you stand on Tua versus Goff for a 2025 first and Superflex?
Yeah, I prefer Tua. I think
that's reasonable.
I also Goff's 3 years older. It's not that big of a difference. I feel like Goff, if his just completely evaporated at any moment, it wouldn't be as surprising to me.
It would not be surprising in any way, shape, or form for Jared Goff to just be done. For Ben Johnson and co. to be like, yeah, let's do. I mean, maybe not Hendon Hooker, but let's take Shadur Sanders with the 19th overall pick or whatever. Like that is not surprising to me. I was never really a Tua guy. I did actually, weirdly, I liked him more as a prospect, and then I kind of watched him play in the NFL, and I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. He He might be too small. I think he might have a little bit of the Bryce Young problem where like he might be too small.
The only thing that actually scares me with him is I think that people are sleeping a little bit on how hot Mike McDaniel's seat could get if things go bad this year. Because Tyreek's locked up, Tua's locked up, Waddle's locked up. Like, if you tell me McDaniel's no chance that he's not gone in the next 3 years, and I think one of the next 3 years, Tua is going to have just an insane passing season. And it might be this year. Let's take a quick break. We've got some lower end dynasty buys to finish up the show.
College football is back. SMU at Nevada on CBS Sports Network.
So I said when we were talking about Achane that there were some serious like wars being fought on Twitter. I had no idea the wars we were going to spark in the chat.
This happens every day in my YouTube channel. Every day when I stream these drafts, people, because I'm like obviously super Achane bull, so like I take him over Barkley and Jonathan Taylor, and someone will be new to the stream for the first time and they'll be like, dude, what are you doing? So I'm used to it.
So yeah, it's happened again. I will say, like, Dylan, thank you for bringing any listener questions at the end of the show. You know what? I think we're going to have time for a couple. So let's fill up the chat with some listener questions. And yes, Joe, the chat is full of angst. That's exactly the right word for this. There'll be no angst here. We're talking about cheaper dynasty buys. These guys aren't going to cost you near as much. Nobody should get too fired up about this. Dontavian Wicks, the current wide receiver 53 by current ADP.
Probably depends on your league how much he costs, though.
Nobody ever fights over the Packers wide receivers. This won't be a problem at all. Make your case for Wicks and kind of tell me, like, between Christian Watson and Jaden Reed and Wicks and Romeo Doubs, like, this was more confusing than the Chiefs wide receiver room.
Well, it's more confusing because you can't have conviction that any of them are bad. Whereas like you could maybe be like, well, I could see how Rashee Rice could be bad. I could see how it doesn't work out for Hollywood Brown. Anything like that. I think even Doubs, who is the worst of them by the advanced metrics, by yards per route run and targets per route run, it can be explained by saying, well, he plays the most snaps. So if the guy, people do kind of miss this in the advanced analytics stuff, which is that if there's one wide receiver who like basically never subs off, his per route stuff is just going to be worse because the divisor is lower. So you see this with Tyreek Hill. We're like, oh my God, Tyreek Hill broke every record for yards per route run and targets per. Well, yeah, he runs about 72% of the routes. Go look at like Randy Moss great seasons. How many? Like it would be like he would like literally never sub off. He'd run 97% of the routes. So it's a little bit different.
Right.
My case with Wicks would be he's the one who has the biggest ability to be a small loss, big win. Like, okay, maybe Wicks doesn't plan out. Maybe it is. Maybe Watson stays healthy and Jaden Reed is this gadget guy and he's able to go from 65% of the routes to 75% of the routes, and Romeo Doubs is Doubs and they play a bunch of 12 personnel, and Wicks is kind of just like 40% of the routes, 35% of the routes, a really good rotational wide receiver. Well, yeah, that's probably fine. You could probably suffer that loss and it'll be okay. Whereas the upside outcomes are Wicks was their best receiver in yards per route run, targets per route run. I mean, people are so sick of this stuff. Watson gets injured, Reed route scale back, Doubs route scale back. He's immediately startable every single week. And the thing is if you just give all three of those guys, you scale their routes back. Let's say Watson goes 60% of the routes, 75% for Doubs, 60% for Jaden Reed. That right there, without anything else happening, can get Wicks to 60% of the routes. Just that happening, right, which is pretty big.
I think, and you can, like, I think this is part of what makes it the worst. Is like you said, Romeo Doubs by the advanced numbers looks the worst. And I also think that the Packers coaches and maybe even Jordan Love think Romeo Doubs is the best football player in the receiver room. Like, I think of all those guys' routes, I can see Christian Watson suffering another injury. That's not hard to believe. I can see Jaden Reed routes just never really popping. That's not hard to believe. I have a hard time seeing Romeo Doubs playing less if he's healthy.
That's probably the least likely of the things, but you got to remember, like, I think people kind of miss this with coaches. I think the great example of people missing this is with Harbaugh, like projecting the Chargers to run 900 times. Like, coaches like to win. the end of the day, a reasonable coach, a good coach, I'm not applying this to Arthur Smith or Adam Gase or whatever, but coaches mostly like to win. I think LaFleur likes to win. Wicks is their best wide receiver. I mean, the results would indicate Wicks is their best player. Every time this guy gets on the field, good stuff happens. The more you stack those good results, the harder it becomes to keep him off the field, particularly if you want to win football games. And so maybe it's not Dobbs, maybe it's Watson. But I think if Wicks continues to play this well, he definitely could bring Dobbs down to being 75% of the routes instead of 85%.
So I'm not going quite as cheap. So there is a bigger risk here, but my lower end buy was Chris Godwin, who's still just wide receiver 42. I am buying that him going back to the slot is really going to help with things. I'm not sure I'm totally buying Chris Godwin in the Cooper Kupp role, but I do kind of expect now that he's going to have more targets than Mike Evans, because most of the time we've seen those two guys together, Godwin's earned more targets. It's just that his targets aren't near as valuable as Mike Evans. I think this could be a situation where he's a number 2 wide receiver for this year, and then Evans is gone, and we get another wide receiver 1 season from Chris Godwin, and he's not valued right now as a top 40 dynasty wide receiver.
It's so interesting that Godwin has always been a dynasty favorite, a fantasy football favorite. People have always kind of liked him better than his production has been. And basically he kind of has like 4 bad games for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, like kind of just like a bad month. And people are like, it's over.
I'm out.
And I'm kind of including myself in that. Honestly, it's not like I'm like jazzed to be buying Chris Godwin. My only concerns would be Dave Canales leaving the Buccaneers. Like, how much of that magic was Dave Canales? Could be that next offseason we're like, oh yeah, we were all kind of freaking out about Dave Canales, and turns out it didn't matter. Like he didn't fix anything in Carolina. And I mean, Liam Cohen has a pretty good track record, actually. Right. So I see it. I will ask you this. Are you worried about the Jalen McMillan drumbeat? That would be my perspective on it.
I'm not really. I think that he is a long-term play. I think it's great that he's looking good. I don't think, unless Chris Godwin or Mike Evans get hurt, there's just not a way that a guy like that comes in and is taking targets away from those two. And I think we saw, like, this was the second time in Godwin's career where the touchdown rate has just been minuscule, and that's kind of crushed his fantasy ranking versus his actual production. But I think we saw late in the year that he and Baker Mayfield finally kind of got on the same page. He out-targeted Evans.
Or remember his wife posted an Instagram story basically being like, why are they not giving my husband the ball? And then he got like 11 targets the next week.
It worked. So maybe she should do that before week 1 this year. We've got one more dynasty buy from Davis Mattek, and it is a doozy. Gabe Davis, wide receiver 78. Does this mean, please tell me that this doesn't mean you're out on Brian Thomas? Because I am very in on Brian Thomas.
No, I'm out on Kirk. Out on Christian Kirk.
Let's talk about Gabe Davis.
and out on Ingram at cost. Like, I just straight up prefer. Actually, I think your boy Jake Ferguson is probably better than Evan Ingram right now. So the Gabe Davis thing is based on 2 things. The first being, it's very hard to buy a wide receiver for a 3rd round pick who, like, literally is going to run about 97% of the routes. Like, Gabe Davis basically never comes off the field when he's healthy. He is an incredible run blocker. He's very fast. He is not a great route runner. Like, I wouldn't say getting open is like the thing he does best, but he's just like pretty steady. And the Jaguars at least have been paying lip service to the idea of using him as a more complete wide receiver, like giving him a fuller route tree. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But particularly in these best ball leagues that I'm in, I mean, I play in all the formats. I am a true dynasty virgin, right? I literally probably have 25 dynasty teams if I counted. But the best ball league specifically, I mean, a 2025 3rd for like, I'm getting a minimum of 2 spike weeks, a minimum, with upside for like way more. Like, he's like the cheapest full-time wide receiver in fantasy football right now, like based on my reading of the market.
And I think full-time is an important distinction. Like, I would not be surprised if he's playing 85, 90% of the snaps. It might be kind of a Romeo Dobbs situation where we would like, please sit down and let the other guys play more. But I don't think he's going to, because he's someone who's probably a better football player than fantasy football player. But I definitely agree. Like, in best ball, he's going to have some spike weeks. My last really cheap dynasty buy, and it's really more of just a red shirt season probably, but Keaton Mitchell, not ready from his knee injury last year. He has old Derrick Henry in front of him. He has old Justice Hill in front of him. He was electric. He was lower volume Devon Achane last year when he got touches, and hopefully he'll be fully ready by 2025. He is currently RB 63. I'd like to buy him and just sit him on my bench for the rest of the year, especially if I can just sit him in IR. It doesn't even cost me a roster spot.
Very cheap. I will say I am so deep that you could, maybe this is me being best ball brained.
Yeah.
I'm like legitimately excited about Rasheen Ali if he makes the 53-man roster for the Ravens. That could be total best ball brain. Like I've just, it's too in the weeds, right? It's too in the weeds to be like this 4-year player who missed a season for like basically like mental health stuff at Marshall. He ran track, by the way. He took a year off of football and ran track at Marshall. And it was a weird profile of a guy to get drafted in the 5th round. Like normally he'd be a UDFA. So I think the Ravens see something, but that's really it. It's probably too, that is too inside baseball. I think officially Rasheen Ali is too inside baseball.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's why like there's so many different ways to play this game, so many different formats. Like that's why we can talk about 400 different players. We did have a question in the chat, and there's been so much fighting that you caused that I can't even find it, but I'm going to ask you, like somebody said, and I think I was asked this question 2 months ago and basically said, I don't know. We're going to figure that out during the college football season. But how's the 2025 draft looking for rebuilding teams, stacking assets? And if you have an answer to that, I'm going to let you give it. But I'm also going to ask, like, do you kind of ascribe to the philosophy that next year's draft class always runs through these cycles where it's definitely not
2023 was supposed to be the greatest class of all time, and then it wasn't. And then the 2024 class was supposed to be bad, and it ended up being like 13 deep of blue chip players because, but what I would say is right now, it looks pretty bad. It looks like I would be sending out 2025 picks to get blue chip players because the big difference specifically for what we do, a lot of these leagues are super flex. The quarterbacks stink. That's
the distinction I wanted to make. I think in one quarterback leagues, I'm not ready to make that statement that it's worse at all than 2024. Maybe worse at wide receiver. I think.
But Luther Burden is a Marvin Harrison Jr. tier prospect, I think. So that just having like a guy who immediately will come in and be a top 25 asset in startups juices up a class for sure.
And much better potential at this point, at least in the running back class, which is not saying a lot because we didn't love the.
Well, spoiler alert: if you play in a league with me and you want to get Ashton Jeanty, you are not going to get him. I will be moving heaven and earth and everything in between to get as many Ashton Jeanty shares as I can.
That is not a name that I think anybody thought we were going to hear on this show.
So good. He's so good. Yeah, if you have not, treat yourself today during lunch. Just watch like 5 minutes of Ashton Jeanty highlights at Boise State.
You came for Dynasty Buys. You got 2025 analysis. So we're going to settle on right now. It definitely looks worse for super flex leagues. It's undecided, but better at running back for 1 QB leagues. Davis, before you go, and again, I always appreciate you coming on, just kind of tell everybody what you've got coming up for the season. And for people who tuned in late, remind them where they can find your work.
I actually will be streaming this afternoon at noon Central over on my YouTube channel. We'll be doing some Best Ball Mania drafts. Basically, I'm going to be streaming every day from now into the beginning of the NFL season. So if you are hanging around, you like all that stuff, you can get that there. And then all of my content, written content, rankings, all that premium stuff is over on my Patreon. Very, very simple. It's just like every redraft tiers. I mean, you guys know, you're all experienced fantasy managers. All that stuff is over on patreon.com/Davis Mattek.
Thank you to everybody who listened to the podcast. Thank you to everybody almost everybody who was active in the chat today. I want to thanks Nada, thanks Davis. And for these guys, I'm Heath. We will talk to you next Tuesday.